Good afternoon, guys. How you doing? This is December 1st. My name is Mike McCormick. As you guys know, been following us. I'm the president of Advanced Criminology here in Owings Mills, Maryland. And today's topic deals with why we don't and why we do not, at this point, have a better description of the assailant in Officer Suter's death. So that's the focus today. We were last on, or the last video that we posted was on November 28th. Where I did the kind of the walkthrough with you guys, showing you the area, the particular murder area where the detective was slain. It looks like in the future we're going to be probably in the next 2 weeks. I have to see how the time is with resources that we have here, because we're not, for the things that we do, we're not being paid to do anything that we do. We do this just to raise the consciousness and awareness of citizens around the country, and particularly some of the citizens and all citizens who live in Baltimore. The criminal justice system, as you know, is in definitely need of dire overhaul. And what we do, we feel as though we provide a good service with what we can develop through policies and procedures. And that's pretty much where my focus is today. We're going to be looking at a couple of policies that both detectives that were involved in the unfortunate death of Detective Suter. We're going to look at some policies where had they been followed, perhaps things would have turned out differently. And it's easy for me to sit here and kind of say that because I wasn't the officers on the scene, and I'm only giving you typically what happens based upon my experience in the years that I had in the force of what is supposed to happen. Now, they've updated some policies since then, so the policies that I'm going to be talking about are very much recent and very much updated, that would have been in effect policies that should have been followed that day. So let's start off. Take my glasses off. We want to look at, and these policies, by the way, is not something that we magically found. These are very readily available on the police department's website, Baltimore City Police Department website, under the tab called Transparency. And then you click on Policies. And so, as I told you when we first started off with putting information out there, that whatever information that we put out, we certainly can verify through documents, through sources that we have both in the police department, other police agencies, and people who are concerned citizens on the street. So we'll start off with the first policy, and that first policy would be, let's see here. We're going to start off with policy 112. And let me go to 112 here. All right, policy 112 was in effect August 26, 2017. It's actually 12 pages. We're not going to certainly read all 12 pages. But it was 12 pages, and the title of the policy is Field Interviews, Investigative Stops, Weapons, Pat Down, and Searches. So if you see my eyes diverting on the screen from right to left or whatever, it's because I actually have another screen up in Windows with the policies written down, so I'm accurate in terms of what I tell you. So we'll start off there, and one of the things that we recognize is that both of the officers at the time failed to, and let me before we even get started, the Baltimore Sun recently reported through some other sources that it's been determined that the officer who was the second detective who was involved in this case, his name is Detective David Bomenka. That's Bomenka, who was with Detective Suter that day. So now, both officers failed to stop the suspect from the onset during this investigation. And I think I explained in one of my videos that departmental policy specifically gives rules and regulations governing stops, okay? And so I think I said to you that in certain stops, particularly there were there were two different stops. There was a field interview, and a field interview is conducted when the officer in a consensual face-to-face communication with the person under the circumstances in which the person does not have to respond to the questions and is free to leave, actually. Whereas an investigative stop is a physical and verbal action that involves delay, hindrance, or holding of a person. Investigative stops can only be done if an officer has reasonable, articulated suspicion that the individual is committing or about to commit a crime. In this sense here, I'm going to sit in for Officer Suter for a second and just say that it appeared from all accounts that the subject looked suspicious, as they said. So when you look suspicious, it's easy to kind of come around with when you finish articulating, means to really, you have to elongate your explanation in terms of what you saw, how he acted, what did he do to arouse your suspicion. And so that's why they talk about an individual who either has committed, is committing, or is about to commit a crime. And then it goes on to say that this suspicion can be based on facts observed by the officer. Observations reported by trustworthy informants. Informant can give you information. And other factors that take into account the totality of the circumstances of the investigative stop. Okay? Now, because neither Detective Bomenka and Officer Suter is no longer with us, we don't know what articulated suspicion they saw. I can't possibly believe that both of them were in a vehicle and 20 minutes earlier saw a suspect together, which has already been verified that they saw the suspect together, and that we have yet to hear from the commissioner's office in terms of what the suspicious activity was. And then when they saw him a second time, what type of suspicious activity was going on at that time. Now, I'm under the impression that if the suspicious activity was so suspicious, why wasn't a stop conducted then? I've always claimed that I felt like that once that subject had shown that he was suspicious, why wasn't he stopped then, and why wasn't the investigative approach taken where we'd have gotten a lot of information from this individual? Okay, so that was always one of the things that I talked about. The other thing I want to talk about real quick is because we've learned since his death that what type of individual Officer Suter was. Okay, everybody's talking about he was a straight up guy, which I truly believe. I truly believe that based upon some of the people I've talked to. Because not only do I talk to people within different agencies, I talk to people on the street all the time. And so I've talked to people who know and known Officer Suter in that Western District for the years that he's worked there. So Officer Suter was no spring chicken in terms of investigative know-how and how to handle himself on the street. You just don't work in the Western District and not know how to handle yourself, because you'll find yourself not working there very shortly, because you'll probably be transferred or you'll quit. So to stay in the district for 17 years or 16 years, 2 years in homicide, is a credit to what type of officer that he was. So, but this is what I do know. Having worked in patrol, and I consider myself at that time to be an aggressive patrol officer when I was on the department years ago. And in aggressive patrol, and I don't want you to misunderstand when we say aggressive patrol. Aggressive patrol means that you're actually out visibly observing people and watching for crime. That's what it means. It means taking enforcement action without getting a call for service over the radio. That's what it means. All too often, we're so used to watching the television shows where we actually hear an officer get a call on the radio and responds to it. Well, no, in the real world, many calls are not necessarily calls that come from dispatch. They're what they call on view. And that's the terminology that the department uses is when they say on view. It's something that you saw, something that you witnessed, and the crime was about to take place. As I just mentioned before, some of the reasons why you can stop a person for investigative stop. And you take enforcement action right then and there. So that's what type of officer he was, apparently. And that was probably one of the reasons why when homicide decided to select this officer for that particular position, they considered that. Because let's face it, if somebody's going to do a homicide investigation, you kind of got to have somebody that's going to have that dogged mentality, that's really going to go out there and really talk to a bunch of people, that's really going to go out there and try to uncover every piece of evidence they can possibly uncover to solve a murder. And so that's the kind of person that would probably be one of the types of persons that in homicide would want. So Officer Suter wasn't just an officer just to be sitting in his patrol car, waiting for a call to come out on the radio and then respond. He just wasn't going to do that. So that's what I got from some of the folks who had been, who knows him, and some of the people I've talked to on the street. Okay, moving on. So I want to move into Radio Communication Policy 701, because this is both of these policies are so important to this case. It's not even funny from a departmental policy viewpoint in terms of what employees should do and shouldn't do. These two right here really hinge on the actions of both of the officers. So you'll probably in weeks and months to come, you'll be hearing about these two policies. There might be one more, but for now, I'm only seeing two policies that are so important to this case. And then when you look at the series of inactions as we go along with my explanation today, you can see why certain policies are put in place. So Departmental Policy 701, which is Departmental Radio Communications. And this is dated October 3rd, 2016. Okay, again, this policy was in effect prior to the officer's death. Okay, and I'm going to go to, let's see, page 2 of 3. And on that policy, it reads up the top: upon arrival to any call for service, on view, or the scene of police activity, advise communications section dispatcher of your call number and that you are 1023. 1023 is a police code that means that you have an on-view incident at whatever particular location. And if you were in a patrol car and you had got a call for service, when you get to that location, you notify the dispatcher and tell them you're 1023. So here, in this case here, they were already 1023 because it was on view. It says here, special note: notification of a 1023 must be made verbally via police radio. A verbal 1023 acts as a notification to supervisors that the dispatcher and other responding units that an officer is on the scene. Okay, so in this case here, as we said before, we have officers who made eye contact with an individual who was a very suspicious individual. And at that time, they didn't take enforcement action the very first time, where I talked about, which was in the first policy 1112, with investigative stop. It wasn't until the second time they saw the individual that they decided to go with policy 1112 and do the investigative stop. Okay. The problem is they never notified communications that they were 1023. So therefore, the dispatcher would have never known that those two officers were in the Western District, nor would she or he have known that those two officers were at the intersection of Bennett Place and Schroeder Street. She wouldn't have known that information. And this becomes very, very important to this case in terms of police response to that incident. And this is for the following reason. Officer Suter at some point, we know, got into trouble to the point where he cried out for help, essentially on his radio. And we know that there are at least 3 seconds, the police department says, of some type of communications that was hard to make out with the dispatch. And I can tell you just from being on the street, lots of times if you get into, altercation or you're in a situation where you have to get on your radio and make communications, sometimes you cannot be heard because you're yelling on the radio and dispatcher can't understand what you're saying, because what's going on around you or to you is it's so devastating that you're yelling on the radio for help. But it does no good to yell on the radio for help if you can't get out where you are. And that goes back to what I was saying. Had that 1023 been given prior to the officers getting out their vehicles, or been given, even if they were out of their vehicles, let's say walking around talking to people in reference to a homicide that they were there to investigate a year ago, at least when the officers decided to approach that area, Officer Suter, he could at least got on the radio at that point and said, look, let me have a backup unit roll up here. I'm investigating a particular subject. They never did that. Now, we don't know why Officer Suter didn't do it. We don't know why Bomenka didn't do it. I only suspect, again, this is me speculating just based upon some of the things that I used to do in patrol, where sometimes I didn't follow policy. I'm just as guilty. Where you get so used to, you gotta understand something, and I don't think a lot of people understand this. Officer Suter was only in homicide for 2 years, and he worked aggressive patrol and enforcement 16 of those years. So you just don't change overnight from that type of patrol officer to a laid-back detective in homicide, where you go from taking enforcement action every day, all day, working a 40-hour work week shift, to a person now that's kind of not necessarily enforcing the law every single day. That's not what his role is. He's an investigator now. He goes and solves crimes that have been committed against people. It's a little different posture that one would take. So I can only imagine being in that, whereas when I was in patrol, for the years I was in patrol, and then I was assigned to narcotics, it was like I never left patrol, because a lot of enforcement of narcotic means jumping out the car, running 2 or 3 blocks, chasing people down, wrestling people down to the ground and trying to handcuff them, people who don't want to go to jail. People throwing away narcotics, and just, a whole bevy of things can happen that require you to always be on point, as they say in the street, about what's going on around you, because narcotics is a very dangerous business. Make no mistake about it. You're chasing people at nighttime. You're chasing people 2 and 3 blocks. It's just that intense. Okay, so it wasn't a big change for me to make that leap from aggressive patrol to work in narcotics. Whereas I can see that the officer who had the background of enforcement would do. I can honestly say I could see him doing this. Whoa, something's happening in front of me. Let me go over here and investigate this. And I could also see him not making the call 1023. These are things I can see happening, because sometimes that aggressiveness is something that can blind you. So I'm going to move on from there. Let's see. All right. So the officer, again, he couldn't give out his call sign. He certainly could not give out his location. And again, I talked about that in one of my other videos, where we have to have officers on the street with communications. Both officers had to have communications. Again, officers should never have to call 911 for help, ever. He or she have to call 911 for assistance. Okay, let's talk about David Bomenka. Okay, now we now know that he is the partner based upon Sun reports and a few other online reports. And these are the things that I'm going to be critical of with Detective Bomenka. Bomenka, I believe, failed to move in the direction of fire as a first responder, which tells me one thing. It tells me that he had not received any first responder in-service yearly training as to what his duties would be as a first responder. And I'm sure that if this thing is investigated the way it's supposed to be, we might find that out. Or he may have had first responder training. I don't know. But I certainly would want to see if he had first responder training. Because first responder training will never teach you to move opposite the direction of fire. It's going to teach you to move forward. Now, you can take cover, of course. We don't want you to be out in open fields and get killed. But they're saying you take that action, and you're moving in a tactical manner towards the danger, not from it. So I just think in this particular case here that this is probably a behavior that he was not trained to do, and so it didn't help. I think that he forgot that he used to be in patrol, because every detective that you ever see never starts off as a homicide detective. You have to have a foundation. That foundation comes from being in patrol. That's where it comes from. So I think that because, now he's a seasoned guy, he's not somebody who just started yesterday. So I think that because he was a seasoned guy, in this case here, he forgot his basic patrol instincts of survival. And again, I think lack of training in the area of first responder, that certainly didn't help. Now, here's where it gets, where my opinion, I might be stepping over the line here in my opinion, and I really don't care. I think that because he failed his partner in this particular case here, that he was embarrassed, and based upon the fact that we still don't have a description other than a black jacket and a white stripe, it is my contention that this officer never saw a black male with a black jacket and a white stripe. I think that he was embarrassed to the point that he basically helped get his partner killed. And because of that embarrassment, when the backup officers rolled up to the scene that night and they asked him, just like the dispatcher asked him twice, remember now, I explained to you, she asked him twice for a description. He failed to give a description. It wasn't until other officers came on the scene that description was given to one of the other officers, who in turn gave it to the dispatcher, who then presented that description to everyone that was in that area. That's my estimation of what I believe. If the commissioner's office can prove otherwise, please feel free to contact Advanced Criminology and we'll go from there. That's my position, and I'm going to hold on that position. As time goes on, that might develop into what I truly believe. Now, if he did this with this bogus description, he literally put the lives of hundreds of other officers and first responders in danger. And I'm going to tell you why. Number one, if the police are responding to a crime where there's a murder and shots have been fired, they don't know who to look for on the way there because there is no description. And literally, an officer could pull up to the corner and may think he sees somebody that might have been involved in a crime, even though he doesn't have a description, and say, hey, come here a second. Or an individual might have been running. Let's say that's a good one there. Let's say this individual was running, and about 4 blocks from this crime scene, the officer says, hey, let me talk to you for a second. And the guy all of a sudden whips out a handgun and starts firing at the officer. Now, had the officer known that this guy, based upon a decent description that was given out, right, he would have handled that stop a little differently. See, when you don't know, you can't be held accountable. When you don't know, you can't be held accountable. And so, by not being able to give a full description, that endangered the lives of many first responders who were arriving at that scene, in and around that scene. And you didn't do a service to the citizens of Baltimore, who would have been more than happy to assist in this particular case here, had the description been put out. And one of the other things that is huge would be so many resources were funneled to that area, and to bear. They brought resources to bear in this case. The officer got shot now, okay? And so the resources were brought to bear in this particular area. They wanted to find out who actually did this. So you literally have helicopters, you have outside agencies, probably to the tune of 150 men, and you have equipment. And so you have all these resources in that particular area looking for somebody, in my estimation, that doesn't exist. And so those resources could have been used more efficiently had they had that information in that particular area with a better description. And unfortunately, Detective Bomenka can't hide behind the police department's shield. He can't do that. And so he's going to have to answer to the police department, the citizens of Baltimore, and lastly, the family of Officer Suter. I'm keeping it short today because I've got some things that we want to do next week in reference to this case that involves going back to the crime scene. Going back to the crime scene. So that's the things we're going to do. Look at some other evidence that we think might have been missed, might have been overlooked, and go from there. Listen, please give me your comments on this issue because this is a biggie for me. About this second officer, I've been torn since the beginning of when I started this thing, and I'm still trying to wrangle with as to why this officer conducted himself in the manner that he did. So, like I said, give me your comments, guys, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'm Mike McCormick. I'm with Advanced Criminology in Owings Mills, and I'll talk to you next time I post.